In 1910, the United States Navy watched a man strap himself to a wooden frame covered in fabric and somehow stay in the air. 1 year later, they bought their first aircraft for $5,000. Today, they launch 65,000-ton nuclear-powered warships that carry invisible stealth jets worth more than entire countries. But getting from there to here required over 1,000 different machines. Some changed warfare forever, others exploded on the deck and killed everyone nearby. This is every single aircraft the US Navy ever flew, and the wild stories behind them. Let's begin. Let's begin where it all started, with machines that like death traps than weapons of war. The Curtiss A-1 thrived in 1911 as the world's first amphibious aircraft. It had floats for water, wheels for land, and wings that barely kept it airborne. The Navy paid Eugene Ely to prove planes could operate from ships, and he did it by landing on a wooden platform built on the USS Pena. No arresting wires. No safety net. Just raw courage and a prayer. It worked, and naval aviation was born. The Curtiss Model F came next in 1912. Pilots called it the flying bathtub because that's exactly what it looked like. No instruments, no radio. Just an open seat, a motor, and hope. This plane killed more pilots than enemy fire ever would, but it taught the Navy that air power was the future. When World War I started, the Navy needed patrol aircraft fast. The Curtiss N9 became their training workhorse. Over 560 were built, and they taught thousands of pilots how to take off and land on water without dying. It was slow, heavy, and loud, but it got the job done. The Curtiss HS-2L joined the war effort as a submarine hunter. It flew low over the freezing Atlantic searching for German U-boats, trying to sink Allied supply ships. The missions lasted hours in an open cockpit with nothing but goggles and a leather protection. Pilots returned with frostbite, but they returned alive, and that mattered. Then came the NC-4, a massive 4-engine flying boat that did something nobody thought possible. In 1919, it became the first aircraft in history to cross the Atlantic Ocean. The flight took 23 days with multiple stops, and the crew faced storms, fog, and mechanical failures that nearly killed them. But when the NC-4 landed in Portugal, it proved no longer an invisible wall. Aviation had gone global. The 1920s brought peace, and with it came the birth of aircraft carriers. The USS Langley, converted from a coal ship, became America's first flattop in 1922. It needed fighters, and the Navy chose the Vought VE-7, a nimble biplane originally designed as a trainer. They strapped guns to it and called it a fighter. It worked well enough to become the standard for the next decade. Boeing entered the game with the F-4B in 1929. This was the classic fighter everyone pictures when they think of old Navy planes. Yellow wings, open cockpit, leather helmets, and silk scarves. Pilots loved it because it was fast and agile. It dominated carrier operations throughout the 1930s and set the standard for what a naval fighter should be. But the Navy all experimented with bizarre concepts. The Curtiss IC Sparrowhawk had no landing gear. Instead, it hung from a trapeze hook under giant airships like the US Macon and USS Akron. These fighters launched in midair, scouted ahead, then hooked back on the mothership while flying. When both airships crashed in storms, the entire program died with them. Grumman arrived in 1931, the first Navy fighter with retractable landing gear. It looked fat and awkward, earning the nickname Fifi, but it flew faster than anything else in the fleet. Pilots finally got enclosed cockpits, which meant they could fly higher without freezing to death. The Grumman F-3F came in 1935. as the last biplane fighter the Navy would ever use. It looked like a flying beer barrel, but it was tough and reliable. The pilots who learned to fight in this plane would soon face the Japanese Zero in the Pacific, and the lessons learned here kept them alive. Meanwhile, the Navy developed dive bombers. The Great Lakes BG-1 refined the tactic of diving straight down at enemy ships and releasing bombs at the last second. This dangerous method would later win the Battle of Midway and change naval warfare forever. The Curtiss SBC Helldiver entered service in 1937 as the last combat biplane the Navy ever ordered. By the time it arrived, the world had moved on to faster monoplanes. It served briefly, then disappeared into history as outdated technology. The age of biplanes was over. Training became critical as war clouds gathered over Europe and Asia. The Naval Aircraft Factory Amiens Canary filled Navy airfields with its bright yellow paint. Thousands of pilots learned basic flying in this rugged biplane. It was simple, forgiving, and nearly impossible to break. If you wanted to fly for the Navy, you started here. The Stearman N2S took training to the next level. This open-cockpit biplane taught combat maneuvers and aerobatics. It was so well built that hundreds still fly today at air shows. Nearly every American pilot in World War II learned to loop and spin in a Stearman before moving on to fighters. Then December 7th, 1941 happened. Pearl Harbor burned, and America went to war overnight. The Navy needed fighters immediately, but what they had was the Brewster F-2AA Buffalo. On paper it looked good. In combat against the Japanese Zero, it was a disaster. Slow, heavy. Buffaloes were slaughtered at the Battle of Midway. Almost every single one launched was shot down. The Navy pulled them from combat immediately. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat became the desperate replacement. It was slower than the Zero and less agile, but it was built like a tank. Pilots developed the Thatch Weave, a defensive tactic where two Wildcats protected each other. It worked. Wildcats held the line during the darkest days of 1942, when America had nothing better to fight with. Grumman listened to combat pilots and built exactly what they asked for. The result was the F-6A Hellcat, which arrived in 1943 and immediately dominated the Pacific. It was faster, tougher, and easier to fly than anything Japan had. Hellcats destroyed over 5,000 enemy aircraft with a kill ratio of 19-1. If you flew Hellcat, you were probably coming alive. The Vought F-4U Corsair joined the fight with its distinctive bent wings and massive propeller. The Navy initially rejected it for carriers because it bounced dangerously during landing. The Marines took it instead and used it to devastate Japanese positions from island airstrips. It became known as Whistling Death because of the sound it made during a dive. Japanese soldiers feared it more than any other aircraft. Dive bombers won the Pacific War. The Douglas SBD Dauntless looked slow and outdated, but it was accurate. At Midway in 1942, squadrons of Dauntless bombers sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in 5 minutes. That single attack changed the entire war and proved that aircraft carriers were now the most powerful ones on Earth. Torpedo bombers had it worse. The Douglas TB Devastator was obsolete by 1942, but the Navy still sent them into battle at Midway. Nearly every single one was shot down, but their sacrifice pulled Japanese fighters down to sea level, which cleared the sky for the dive bombers above. They died so others could win. The Grumman TB Edger replaced the Devastator, a heavy torpedo bomber that could survive punishment. A young pilot named George H.W. Bush flew one when he was shot down over the Pacific. He was rescued and returned to combat. The Avenger Suppose that craft worked in the shadows. Consolidated PY Catalina was a slow-flying boat that could stay airborne for over 20 hours. It rescued thousands of downed pilots from the ocean and spotted the Japanese fleet before Midway, giving America the warning that led to victory. When the war ended in 1945, the Navy had proven that propeller planes could dominate the seas. But jet engines were coming, and everything was about to change. The McDonnell F-1 Phantom became the Navy's first jet fighter in 1947. It was unarmored with short range, but it proved jets could land on carriers safely. That was enough. The Grumman F-9F Panther arrived for the Korean War in 1950 as the Navy's first real bat jet. It was reliable, rugged, and painted in a beautiful blue scheme. Panthers flew thousands of missions over Korea, attacking bridges, trains, and enemy positions. It became famous after one crashed dramatically into a carrier in the movie The Bridges at Toko Arai. Jets getting faster. The Douglas F-40 Skyray looked a manta ray and climbed like a rocket. It was designed to intercept Soviet bombers before they could reach the fleet. In 1953, it set the world speed record and proved jets had officially replaced propellers as the future. One propeller plane refused to die. The Douglas Honest Skyrater entered service in 1906 and flew all the way through Vietnam. No jet could fly as slow or carry as much. It hauled bombs, napalm, rockets, and once even carried a kitchen sink as a joke. Ground troops loved it because it could stay overhead providing close support. Vietnam's everything. The McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom Q became the workhorse of the war. It was big, ugly, and smoking, but it dominated the skies. Phantoms set 16 world speed records and proved that with enough engine power, even a brick could fly supersonic. The Grumman F-4 Tomcat arrived in 1904 as the ultimate fleet defender. With swing wings that moved during flight and massive Phoenix missiles that could hit targets 100 miles away, it was built to kill Soviet bombers. Top Gun made it a legend, and pilots considered it the coolest plane ever put on a carrier deck. The Boeing F-818 Hornet replaced almost everything in the 1980s. It could dogfight and drop bombs using the same airframe. Reliable, digital, and capable, it brought the Navy into the computer age. The Super Hornet came later as a bigger, better version that still serves as the backbone of carrier airwings today. Stealth arrived with the Lockheed Martin 35C Lightning II. It's a flying computer that gathers information, shares it instantly across the fleet, and kills enemies before they know they're being hunted. This fifth-generation fighter, everything the Navy learned in over a century of aviation. The future belongs to drones. The Boeing MQ-25 Stingray is an unmanned tanker that refuels fighters in midair, keeping human pilots out of danger. The Northrop Grumman X-47B proved that autonomous aircraft can take off and land on carriers without any human control. From a wooden frame in 1911 to invisible jets today, the U.S. Navy has flown over 1,000 different aircraft. Some became legends. Others were forgotten failures. But together, they built powerful naval air force the world has ever seen. And they're not done yet.